England has a particular cruelty. It does not announce itself. It simply withdraws. Warmth, money, love, with perfect legal composure, and leaves you kneeling in the mud on an open hillside in the rain, wondering when you became foolish enough to feel anything at all. Her name was Marianne Dashwood, 17 years old, the kind of person who underlined poetry and meant it, who played the piano not to impress a room, but because silence felt dishonest, who believed with every atom of her intelligence that love was the only currency worth holding. She was right. She was catastrophically, devastatingly right. And by the time this story ends, you will not be certain whether that was her ruin or her salvation.
To understand how Marianne Dashwood ended up kneeling in a Devonshire rainstorm, you must first understand what England did to women in the year 1800. When Mr. Henry Dashwood died, a man of property, a good man, the law did not care. The estate of Norland Park passed immediately to his son from his first marriage, John Dashwood, a man of moderate character and a wife of considerably stronger will. Mrs. Dashwood and her 3 daughters, Elinor, Marianne, and Margaret, were left with £500 a year. It was not poverty. It was something more elegant and more permanent. Dependency. The kind that requires a smile. John Dashwood intended to honor his father's dying wish to provide for his stepfamily. He sat with that intention for 3 conversations with his wife Fanny, who reminded him, with perfect sweetness, of their own son's future, their own expenses, and arrived, by degrees, at providing them with nothing. This is where every story of women in this era begins, not with a villain, with a legal document.
They moved to Devonshire, a smaller house, a smaller life, and Elinor Dashwood, the eldest, the sensible one, the one everyone leaned on without asking permission, carried her own wound, silently, as she carried everything. His name was Edward Ferrars, Fanny's brother. Quiet, decent, genuinely kind, without theater. Elinor loved him with the full force of a woman who never says so out loud. He seemed to return it. He visited, he looked at her when she wasn't looking, the way people do when they're afraid of what their own face might reveal. And then he pulled back, without explanation. She noticed immediately. She said nothing, because that is what Elinor does. She carries the full weight of her feelings, perfectly composed, and waits for reasons that may never come. The novel treats this as her great virtue. It is also, quietly, her great grief.
And then, on a wet October morning, Marianne twisted her ankle on the hillside above Barton Cottage, and a man appeared on a horse. His name was John Willoughby. He was handsome, in the way that catastrophe is always handsome. Immediately, completely, before you have time to form a question. He carried her home without asking. He quoted poetry. He cut a lock of her hair and asked to keep it. He played her piano with the same reckless physical feeling she brought to it. For Marianne, this was not infatuation. This was recognition. She believed she had found the other half of herself, the person who felt exactly as she felt, saw the world through the same bright, overwhelming lens. She was half right. And that half was the most dangerous thing in the world. While Marianne fell freely, Elinor received her devastation in a garden from a woman named Lucy Steele. Lucy was pretty, in the calculated way of someone he has always known that pretty is useful. She took Elinor aside with the body language of someone sharing a confidence, leaning close, voice soft, eyes watchful, and told her, sweetly, almost carelessly, that she and Edward Ferrars had been secretly engaged for 4 years, since before Elinor had ever met him. She produced the evidence, a letter in his hand, a portrait miniature she wore around her neck. And then she watched Elinor's face with the careful, pleased attention of someone watching a fire they have deliberately set. Elinor looked at the miniature. She handed it back. She said, "I wish you every happiness." She meant it. She walked home. And then she did not speak of it to anyone for months. She had promised Lucy her silence, and Elinor Dashwood keeps her promises, even the ones that cost her everything.
Willoughby stopped writing. Marianne had sent 3 letters, each one more exposed than the last, the letters of someone who has not yet learned that vulnerability requires reciprocity to be safe. He did not reply to any of them. In London for the winter season, she waited, and at a party, glittering, crowded, nowhere to hide, they finally stood in the same room. He greeted her formally, inclined his head, addressed her as Miss Dashwood, moved on. She stood in a ballroom in her best dress and watched him turn back to the wealthy woman on his arm, his fiancée, and understood in those seconds that she had been assigned a role in someone else's story without being told. She had been atmosphere. She had been practice. The next morning, the letter arrived. It returned her letters unopened. It informed her that any attachment between them had been a misunderstanding on her part, that he wished her well. It was a masterwork of cruelty, because it was written to be blameless. Marianne did not recover. She stopped eating. She walked in the rain without a coat. She played the same song on the piano, his song, over and over in the dark until the household could not bear to hear it. She stopped reading. She sat at the window and watched the weather change and could not bring herself to care which way it went. She was not performing grief. This is the thing every generation gets wrong when they call her foolish. She was not theatrical. She was honest. She had loved something completely and lost it completely, and she saw no reason to pretend otherwise. The world calls women like Marianne hysterical. The world means they are inconvenient. They take up too much space. Their feelings exceed the room's tolerance. But Marianne Dashwood, kneeling in the rain on that hillside, she is the most honest person in this entire story. She simply could not afford to stay that way. It was Colonel Brandon who rode through the night to find her mother. Brandon who arranged the doctors, the carriage, the return. Brandon who sat outside the sick room door, without being asked, without announcing himself. He was 35. Marianne had once laughed at the idea that a man of 35 could feel anything worth the name of love. He had heard her. He had not said a word. He had once loved someone too, a woman the law had taken from him and slowly destroyed. He had spent a decade living quietly with that knowledge. He understood grief. He did not try to cure it. He loved Marianne, without performance, without expectation, without the requirement that she be different. He simply continued, returned, was there. No one remarks on how extraordinary this is. That is perhaps the point. Marianne recovered, and that same week a letter arrived for Elinor. Lucy Steele, who had carried her secret engagement to Edward Ferrars like a loaded pistol, had used it at last. She had left Edward and married his brother Robert instead, for the money, for the better income, with apparently no difficulty at all. Edward Ferrars was free. Elinor had carried Lucy's secret for months without breaking. She had watched Marianne suffer while managing her own grief without complaint. She had sat in rooms with Lucy Steele and smiled. She had composed herself, until composure had become indistinguishable from who she was. And then it broke. Not quietly, not gracefully, completely. The way things break that have been held under pressure for too long. She wept, without control, without elegance, in a way she would not have permitted if anyone had been watching. Jane Austen held this scene until the last possible moment, because she understood the release only works if you have earned it, and Elinor had earned it completely. When Mrs. Ferrars discovered that her son, Edward, had been secretly engaged for 4 years to Lucy Steele, a woman of no family, no fortune, she disinherited him immediately, transferred everything to his younger brother Robert, and considered the matter closed. Edward refused to break his engagement, even when breaking it would have restored everything.
he would have kept his word. He would have married a woman he did not love and lived with that choice for the rest of his life. Lucy Steele, surveying the new arithmetic, made a different calculation. Within weeks, she had transferred her affections and her engagement to Robert Ferrars, the wealthier brother, the new heir. Edward was left with nothing but his conscience, which was, as it turned out, the only thing he had not surrendered. Before the end, one final disruption. Willoughby came to a house where Marianne lay recovering, where he had forfeited every right to stand. He found Elinor instead, and he told her everything. That his feelings for Marianne had been real. That he had abandoned her because he had already ruined a young girl, Colonel Brandon's ward, a girl of 15, seduced her, left her with child, and walked away entirely. That he needed a wealthy wife to survive his debts. That he married for money and received misery in return. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a witness. Someone to confirm that he had, at some point, been capable of something real. Elinor listened. And then she did the most complicated thing in the entire story. She felt sorry for him. Not enough to excuse what he did, but enough to understand it.
Marianne Dashwood married Colonel Brandon the following spring. She was 18. He was 35. Every generation argues about this ending. They call it surrender, a woman broken by passion and reshaped into reason. They are not wrong to ask the question. Jane Austen lived in a world where women's choices were constrained at every turn, by money, by law, by rooms full of people who would never be accountable for the consequences. It would be dishonest to pretend this ending exists outside of that. But here is what the argument misses. She chose him, freely, having survived everything, having seen what the burning kind of love costs. The man who rides through a storm without being asked, who loves without requiring performance, who waits outside a sickroom door all night and tells no one, is not the compromise. He is the rarer thing. Marianne, at last, knew the difference. He came on a Tuesday afternoon. No letter, no announcement. Just Edward Ferrars at the door, hat in hand, asking to speak with Elinor. He told her the engagement with Lucy was over, that he was free, that he had come, if she would permit it, to say what he had not been able to say for a very long time. Elinor, who had carried his secret and Lucy's secret and her own feeling for months without a word of complaint to anyone, Elinor said yes. Not with the flooding relief of a romantic heroine, with the quiet, sturdy joy of someone who has been right about something for a very long time and is finally allowed to say so. This is Elinor Dashwood's ending. It does not happen on a hillside in the rain. It happens at a cottage door on a Tuesday. That evening, Marianne sat at the piano. She played the song, the same song, the one Willoughby had loved, the one she had played until her head fell on the keys. She played it differently now, not to call something back, to put it down. Colonel Brandon stood in the doorway and listened. He did not enter. He simply waited, as he always had, while she finished. Outside, England. The weather, as always, changing. What endures is not what burns brightest. It is what remains. Sense and sensibility. Not one or the other. Both. At last.